Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Game Changer. I'm Mariam Zia. Today we will delve into the heart of an important happening that is taking place in Dubai. Of course, we'll be talking about a recently concluded COP28 session. We know that in COP28, more than 200 countries participated from across the globe. Not only world leaders participated in this significant summit to express their concerns for the future of the planet, but also activists, climate activists from across the world raised their voices for the developing countries. Of course, Pakistan was one of the significant voice when we talk about this summit. Pakistan has always advocated for climate affected countries, especially the developing world that is being affected by actions of the developed world. Today we will unpack the key takeaways from COP28, how this COP was different, what were the pledges made, what would be the mechanisms that would be enforced to implement when we talk about the loss and damage fund. And of course there are voices within the COP28 session as well regarding the mechanisms. There are still criticisms, but there is hope as well for the future of our planet. Of course we'll be talking about all these pledges and what is the way forward when we talk about climate action and its implications for not only Pakistan but for all countries of the world. Later in the program, we will also be talking about the recent development surrounding the decision that was taken in Indian Supreme Court regarding Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Of course, Pakistan has rejected this unilateral decision of the Indian Supreme Court, and we will be talking about the implications of this decision, and of course this matter of when we talk about Kashmir issue, it has been on the United Nations Security Council agenda for over 70 years. We will be talking about the way forward and its implications for Pakistan-India ties as well, and for the regional security as well. To discuss this and more, we are joined in the studios by Dr. Khalid Waleed, who is economist and of course commentator on international affairs. Welcome to the program. We are also joined by Mr. Shehryar Khan, who is commentator on international affairs, and we are joined online by Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, who is expert in international affairs. Welcome to the program. Dr. Khalid, let me start with you, of course, because you were part of many of the sessions that took place in Dubai. What are your key takeaways from this important session or summit, and what were your expectations when you were going for the summit, and how many of your expectations were actually met?
Well, in terms of understanding the expectations and what were my expectation and what I got from that meeting is a bit tricky, because there is not a consensus on the final text that has been come up from the COP28. But there are few important insights and takeaways from the COP28. First is that there is more focus on energy transition in terms of just energy transition and orderly phase down of the fossil fuels, although there has been controversy about these two terms, phasing down and phasing out.
Yes, and for our viewers' understanding, let's talk about, because this is one of the terminology that has faced criticism from around 80 countries of the world, more than 80 countries who are, and then there are oil producing countries who want to change the terminology, and that is the reason that we are still stuck at the draft. But can you tell us, for our understanding, what is the difference between both?
Well, you need to understand the economic dimensions of fossil fuel based economies and other sort of things. Obviously the world economy is based around the fossil fuel for decades, and our development has been coupled with fossil fuels. Now there are two types of voices around the world. First is that we need to ensure climate justice, and climate justice calls for rapid phase out of fossil fuels, which means that we need to not only retire our fossil fuel base power plants and other sort of things, but we need to look for the alternatives in terms of renewable energy and so on and so forth, so that we can have this rapid and exponential phasing out of fossil fuels. Second voice that is coming from the Middle Eastern countries, economies, those who are based on fossil fuels, because this exponential increase is not possible. There are so many aspects of this transition. For example, what would happen to the workforce involved in this fossil fuel based economy, what would happen to the workers involved in the mining, in terms of coal mining, and so on.
Infrastructure.
We need infrastructure. And secondly, the developing countries, they do not have that kind of finances, particularly Pakistan, which is also affected by the climate change. We are struggling and we are striving for the loss and damage fund, but at the same time, if we are asked to have this rapid energy transition, that would cost our economy as well. We need more and more finances. So there are two types of voices. First is rapid and exponential phasing out of fossil fuel. Second is the orderly, just energy transition in stepwise, that is phasing down the fossil fuels. So I think the world needs to find the balance between climate justice and orderly energy transition.
Dr. Khalid, as per your understanding, were there some groundbreaking developments when we talk about these negotiations that took place in COP28 that you can, that stood out to you as of noteworthy?
Well, there are three groundbreaking, I would say. First is that leading from the last year's COP Sharm el-Sheikh, Pakistan's and G77 plus China's initiative, the Loss and Damage Fund, that has operationalized in this year's COP. Although the pledges are not up to the mark, there are like peanuts in 100 billion target, but at the end that has been operationalized, and the World Bank and on the first day, World Bank and IMF and other FIs would be making frameworks for targeted distribution of these loss and damage funds. Second thing is that there is more focus on just energy transition, which is, I think, the major way forward in terms of energy transition. Third is that there is more focus on other sectors, for example, health, food security, and poverty alleviation, so that we can make them aligned with 1.5 degree. Inclusivity as well, because we cannot achieve this target of 1.5 degree without incorporating other sectors, for example, food production, for example, health systems, because climate change, changing climate, that will not only affect the fossil fuel or energy landscape of the world, it will also affect the climate, also affect the health systems, it will also affect the food production, food security, and so on and so forth. So we need to have this welcome initiative coming, that there is more integration, more inclusiveness, and more synergies coming into the fold, so that we can rapidly and we can have this 3 or 2-fold increase in renewable energy transition.
Right. We'll come back to you, but Shariar, when we talk about these developments, how do you see the future trajectory of climate action shaping when we are talking about very passionate discussions from many countries, more than 80% of the countries, or maybe 80 countries, who are advocating for alternates for fossil fuels? How positive is that?
So Mariam, even if you look at the COP28 and if you look at it from a macro point of view, the discussions are only revolving around two things: what the developed countries are willing to do to tackle climate change, and how they were willing to finance this. As Dr. Saab has also mentioned, the whole discussion will revolve around how the fossil fuel challenge will be met. And if you look at the global energy production, 80% of that energy production is made through fossil
fuels. Yes.
So moving from fossil fuels to alternative forms of technology has a lot of challenges, and those challenges are stacked against the developing world.
So decarbonizing the economies, we are talking about decarbonizing the economies. How difficult would that be? And is it going to be practical? Of course, it took us 30 years to reach here, where, of course, countries are at least accepting their responsibility. So what is ahead?
So this declaration hasn't come from the UN conventions or these discussions in the last 30 years. So let's see if today or tomorrow something positive comes out of it. But at the end of the day, what we have to basically see is what the challenges of the developing world are, because that's where we are represented. Even if we move from fossil fuels to alternative forms of energy, do we have the finances that are required to transition from fossil fuels to alternative energies? It will be very difficult, it will be very expensive. And the way Pakistan Pakistan's energy mix and the energy production is geared, it's like more geared towards fossil fuels, it's geared towards coal production, it's like geared towards hydel, and
Because they're
very
cheap.
small. It's
And
cheap.
we have already centuries old infrastructures built for
That's
those.
like the technology that Pakistan is used to. At the end of the day, like the type of technology and the trademarks that are needed to get those energies to developing countries like Pakistan are like very expensive at this point in time. So the question would be, are the developed countries willing to make that sacrifice in providing cheap technology to developing countries and let go of their profit-making intentions? And whether OPEC plus countries that their economies depend on fossil fuels and their exports, will they be willing to transition to phasing out of the fossil fuels? This will be a very key question.
We will be talking about the role of OPEC and OPEC plus countries as well. But Dr. Stiell, let me ask you the basic questions. How do you see the concerns of developing countries were addressed at COP28? And what mechanisms do you see, of course, when we talk about implementation of some infrastructure or, some alternate resources given to these developing countries for switching to the alternate energy resources?
I think that the concerns of the developing countries have been addressed, but what is the degree of that concern addressed, that is debatable. For instance, they developed the budget, but this is too small. Even last year, Pakistan suffered from the floods or these kind of things. Even the entire fund is given to Pakistan. Pakistan is not able to recover from its road infrastructure destruction. So the concerns were there, but at the same time, developed world, as usual, you can say went way, or you can say they followed their own perspective. If you see in this COP28, the focus was, or the motto was, transition to clean energy. And there was a expression of at that time, that by 2050, the nuclear industry will increase the 3 times nuclear production or power generation. And that would be through the not fission technology, which is ordinary. We have, let's say, 412 reactors are operating. The focus will be on fusion reactors. Fusion reactor is a very, very advanced technology. And I didn't see that any developed country expressed a desire that they will assist the developing states in constructing and operating the fusion reactors in order to produce the clean energy in the future. So if you see in that context, they are demanding more from the developing states, especially the states which are not part of this crime of climate degradation, and they are doing less. And even their contribution in these funds is more, the fund which was created earlier for addressing these challenges, their contribution in this fund is very much minimum or deplorable.
Right. And Dr. Khalid, that brings us to the question of global stocktake. Of course, that is to monitor the progress of these countries on the climate action. So, is there some accountability or transparency, and how do you analyze the current global stocktake?
Well, the global stocktake is meant to, bring the transparency to the system so that we can have this regular assessment of what have been pledged and what is under the Paris Agreement and what extent
and how big were the gaps.
We have achieved that, and what is the intensity and what is the scope of these sort of initiatives. So as for now, what the draft has come out from the COP28, there has been little focus on phasing out, more focus on phasing down, more focus on building renewable energy, making it more energy efficient, that is tripling the renewable energy and doubling the energy efficiency, but there is less focus on retirement of fossil fuel plants.
But don't you think that phasing down is more practical, because when we are saying that more than 80% of energy resources are, kind of these fossil fuels, then isn't it more practical?
Well, one thing is clear that we need to go from point A to point B, and point A is that we are currently using more and more fossil fuels. We need to go towards a world which has relying on renewable energy sources with less carbon emissions. What would be the pathway? That is the question. Many countries, they are asking for rapid energy transition, others are asking for orderly manner. So the Middle Eastern economies and economies who are based on fossil fuels, they have introduced some alternative measures. For example, energy efficiencies, for example, cooling pledge, which is that we need to introduce efficiency to our cooling appliances so that our cooling electricity load has come down. Second is that there is more focus from Middle Eastern economies to build the technology of carbon capture and storage so that they can store the emissions from fossil fuels, and then they are taking it to one step further. It is CCUS now, which is carbon capture, utilization and storage, which means they are now going to build the economy of carbon capture so that they can sell it and use it for their inputs as well. So there would be more focus, and there would be two-pronged approaches. First is that there would be more focused on retirement of fossil fuels plants and fossil fuel energy. Second would be how we can have this alternative in terms of energy efficiency and in terms of carbon storage so that these fossil fuel plants can work for the longer period of time. But at the same time, these two initiatives would be win-win for the planet if implemented in their letter and spirit. Second thing is that there was focus by the small island nations, because for them it is life and death, because the global temperature increasing from 155 degrees, that would be catastrophic for them as well. So they want the harsher.
We don't have any option. This is the science, of course.
They do not have
this
any
is
option.
for survival.
Yep, their survival, and for the Pakistan survival as well,
Of
because
all the
we have
developing
faced
countries for that matter.
And another thing that came out from this COP was the methane emissions. Pakistan, in terms of that, is among the top 10 countries in terms of methane emissions. In terms of CO2 emission, we do not have that kind of emissions, but in terms of methane emissions, we need to do a lot. So that would be transforming for the global economy, for the climate, and for the environment as well.
Right. So lastly, Shahryar, how do you see that looking forward, this COP28 is going to be influencing the actions of international community towards climate justice, towards climate financing?
So Mariam, what we have to see is what the developing countries now basically decide and what the final outcome of the COP28 would be. When it comes to Pakistan's point of view, Pakistan has also advocated for the fair transition to low emission pathways. That's what Pakistan is advocating. Other than that, when we look at Pakistan is also advocating for a new collective quantified goal post for 2025, and it's like looking at the financing requirements for developing countries and focusing on how the developing countries will be able to access grant-based support from the climate finance, especially focused on the loss and damages fund. Other than that, Pakistan has also committed that it would cut down its emissions by 50% by 2030. And for that, Pakistan will require a lot of support. So Pakistan has said that they will use their own resources, that would be around 15%, and 35% of those resources for this transition would be coming from the...
And you are talking about our NDCs.
This is Pakistan's commitment that Pakistan has made, but it depends heavily on how much finance Pakistan can access through the loss and damage fund. Right now, Pakistan is looking at around 35% that it wants to finance from the international institutions, or the commitment that is like given in the loss and damages fund. That's just Pakistan. And now if you look at collectively around 200 countries that have to collectively do this effort, the amount that has been committed up till now, around 700 million to the loss and damages fund, is like a drop in the ocean, but it's a good start, let's just say. And we'll have to like see how the developed countries are now committing, or what kind of like final declaration comes out of COP28, and it will really define how the future of climate action would be.
Right, right. Of course. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Khalid, for joining us in this segment. Of course, COP28 has many expectations, but there are still discussions going on, and we have to see that, of course, these pledges are made, how we are going to implement these pledges. That mechanism is still under discussion, and of course the language of phase out and phasing down of fossil fuels is under discussion as well. But of course, when we talk about climate change, we know that keeping the temperature of our planet to 1.5 degree, we don't have any alternate. So the global community has to commit to this for our future generations. We will take a short break here, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the recent decision by Indian Supreme Court, which Pakistan has categorically rejected on Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Welcome back, and now we'll be talking about the recent decision that has been categorically rejected by Pakistan when we talk about the special status of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. To talk more about it, we are joined in the studios by Mr. Humayun Khan. Welcome to the program. Of course, how significant is this decision by Indian Supreme Court when we talk about Article 370 and 35A? And of course, we know that Modi government has its own motive when we talk about the upcoming elections in India. How do you see all these dynamics playing out?
Okay, when it comes to significance of this particular judgment, I would say it's nothing.
Of course.
And it's completely nonsense in a way that you cannot use your domestic judiciary to make an internationally disputed, recognized disputed issue and then rush away and wish away with that. It's unacceptable and it's illegal again. This decision has no legal jurisdiction on the status of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, coming to what you were saying, there are multiple United Nations Security Council resolution under Article 25, starting from United Nations Security Council resolution number 47, 51, 80, 90, 91, and then the last one, which is more significant, is 122, which came in 1957. That resolution categorically says that you cannot change the status of Jammu and Kashmir territory, and if you do so unilaterally, that's illegal. And the only way to deal with this issue is under the auspices of United Nations, you have to have a plebiscite. And that's the exactly gist of this entire thing. This particular judgment that came yesterday is only, I think, making the issue more controversial within India. First, Pakistan never recognized Article 370 or 35A to begin with, because that was part of Indian Constitution, which cannot govern the status of Jammu and Kashmir because it's a disputed territory. And second, when they wish away with that, that is basically making that as a domestic issue, which it cannot be. So in my opinion, this judgment is completely insignificant and would have no jurisdiction on the international matter.
Right. Dr. Stiell, let me ask you about this revocation of Article 370 and Article 35A. How do you think that this impacts the special status of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and what are the legal implications of all this matter?
I think that from the very beginning, Pakistan treated it as a disputed territory as it was referred or explained in the United Nations Security Council resolutions. Mr. Humayun very rightly pointed out and referred all those resolutions that confirmed, reconfirmed that Indian illegally occupied Kashmir is a disputed territory. Now, when we focus on India's constitution, I personally didn't agree even when they included Article 370 in their constitution, and then they started saying that there is a special status for Kashmir. Practically, the special status was that always Kashmir was under the governor rule or dictatorship. So in this context, on 5th August, when they revoked that status, of course, constitutionally, they tried to do something which was not acceptable, because Indians' own constitution is based on pluralistic and it was negation to that. But it was very ironical when yesterday, the Supreme Court, exactly after 4 years, keeping this case, if they had to maintain the simple that they agree or endorse the Indian Parliament amendment by virtue of which Article 370 giving the Indian illegally occupied Kashmir special status ended, then why they took this 4 years? Which kind of the debate it was? I think it was illegally not acceptable. It was
Right.
illegal.
Right.
But
And
I
Dr.
think-
Stiell, how do you think that this decision or this stance of India is going to impact India's global standing when we talk about the recent developings that are taking place across the globe, of course, when we talk about India's terror network, and then these decisions, we know about the situation of human rights in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and of course, Pakistan has always emphasized that India cannot, annex Indian illegally Jammu and Kashmir. How do you think that this is going to impact India's global standing?
I think that unfortunately, in the international politics, human rights, or you can say legality, rule of law, are now dying concepts. And in that context, if the international community have to judge India with reference to the human rights, civility, or rule of law, then India is the darkest state in the world. Because India has revoked, India is not implementing or executing the United Nations resolution. India has blocked the entire Kashmir. Indian illegally occupied Kashmir has been declared not by Pakistan, but the International Human Rights Organization, Amnesty International, as a jail. So Indians, if we can try to judge their image with these references, I think it's a very bad image of India. But is India caring for it? Or is the world taking it seriously? I'm sorry to say India is completely not caring. Even recently, Indian hitmen were killing in Canada, caught in New York, and they are involved in these kind of the state-sponsored terrorism in Pakistan. Their image is very, you can say, a rogue state image. But the international community, especially the Western nations, they think India is good for their strategic and economic objectives in the 21st century. That's why they deliberately ignore. Here, let me remind you that, or my audience, that in 2002 onward, Prime Minister Modi's visas were cancelled by the EU, by the United States, because he was involved in butchering the Gujarati Muslims. But in 2014, when he became a prime minister, his visa was restored and he's moving here and there. But since he came into power, his BJP is involved in genocide of the Kashmir. Everyone knows, but still international community seems silent or dumb and deaf. So
Right.
I say that it is
Right.
not.
And let me take
and
the same
India-
point to the studios. Shahjal, when we talk about, of course, BJP government and the role of especially Mr. Modi in all this, of course, it has been one of the election slogans for the BJP government when we talk about 2019, this revocation of Article 370 and 35A as well. So domestic politics of India also plays an important role, and of course, with upcoming elections in India, how do you see this is going to be impacting the diplomatic channels when we talk about discussions on the rights of Kashmiris?
So Mariam, this decision by the Indian Supreme Court was expected, but it was not very surprising from the way I look at things. Other than that, another connection has emerged, that the Supreme Court of India is in collusion and is partisan towards the Modi government.
Of course.
How? Because this decision will basically boost Modi's popularity, because in the last few months the Congress was very vocal in terms of this issue, and they were challenging the Modi government's revocation of this article as well. So by making this decision at this particular point in time, they have boosted Modi's image in front of their right-wing electorate, and this will basically give him an edge in the upcoming elections. Other than that, there were like some lip service made on establishing some truth and reconciliation, but we have to like see that the human rights situation in Kashmir, where there are enforced disappearances, there are extrajudicial killings, human rights such as internet and freedom of movement are massively curtailed. And obviously, it's like one of the largest human jails in the world, and that's what Human Rights Watch has basically described on how Kashmir is being handled by the Modi government. Other than that, I also like make this connection as well, if you look at the global geopolitical dynamics, that we can clearly see that this Hindutva-led Indian government has taken a page from how Israel basically treats Palestine, and there are like a lot of like similarities there.
Emerging.
And if you connect it to that, we see that if the international community basically ignores the rule of law, there's selective implementation of rule of law, selective implementation of international human rights conventions, there's like selective implementation and a lot of like Islamophobia that's like emerging in the West. Then countries like India, who basically see themselves as revisionist powers, they find excuses on implementing the same and breaking the same laws in their countries as well. So this is also a great challenge to the international community on how the selective implementation of international law is basically repressing the whole cause of the Kashmiris.
Right, and Humayun, given the historical sensitivity of Jammu and Kashmir issue, how do you see the role of United Nations in, of course, human rights violations, and do you expect some developments when we talk about revocation of Article 370 and 35A?
I think not necessarily when it comes to the revocation of these two articles, but as Sharia was mentioning, it's basically a very systematic approach of the current Prime Minister Modi's government, that they have massively deployed these occupation troops there. Since it's on the UN agenda for the last 70 years, or even more than 70 or 75 years, there are numerous resolutions, there are numerous international organizations just like the Amnesty International or Genocide Watch has even warned that there is a preeminent genocide which is happening in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. But having said that, since it has a big economic power, and Dr. Jaspal was already mentioning that earlier as well, the bigger countries have bigger interests there. India has a huge market, lures them in terms of the revenue that they could make out of defense deal, make out of economic deal, and then they ignore the international obligation. But having said
and
that,
that's why we have seen in the recent part that they tried to, organize G20 summit in this occupied territory as well.
absolutely, and but then there are countries like China, there are countries like friendly to the Pakistani, not only Pakistani cause, but the human rights cause as well, has rejected those holding of summits. Even this month they were supposed to hold a beauty pageant in CHNAGER as well. So what India is trying to do is to make this new issue as a new normal.
Yes, they are trying to, create new normal and optics.
Exactly, but this cannot happen because there are 900,000 troops there. As Shahriar was already mentioning there, it's like one of the biggest open jail in the recorded history. There are 13,000 youth who are basically arrested. There are around 3.4 million fake domiciled from other parts of India, so they're trying to change the demographic of Jammu and Kashmir if they ever go to a plebiscite, which they won't. But they're already trying to make this as a new normal. And having said that, I guess Pakistan will continue to pursue its case diplomatically, politically, with our friendly countries, with the OIC, with other international forums, and we will highlight, and not only Pakistan, the Kashmiri youth itself. Now there are even voices from within India and Kashmir as well. I don't know if you remember a few months ago, the former governor of India, Kashmir, Satyapal Malik, he gave an interview about the Pulwama incident and say how Modi used that. Now that the elections are coming again in 4 or 5 or 6 months in India, This has, and interestingly, Prime Minister Modi has tweeted this morning the same tweet which he had tweeted yesterday in Urdu as well, which is for the very first time he has used an Urdu tweet, and he is making this as an election issue involving Pakistan and using Urdu. So this is a very clever move from them, but I guess it has already backfired. The resistance that has come after Mr. Burhanuddin Wani's incident, the youth itself is now out on the road. There are voices within India which is against this, even Congress. There are members of Congress who are saying things against
and Kashmiri
the
leadership as well, of
Absolutely.
course. Lastly, Dr. Jaspal, given the complexities of Jammu and Kashmir issue, what can we anticipate in terms of or in the context of recent developments?
I think that the worst thing which one can anticipate is the butchering of the Kashmiris will further continue. Prime Minister Modi and his government try to crush them more. It's a slap on the face of the human rights or these kind of the things. I think that we have to be also careful that such kind of activities which we have been witnessing since 2016 to date or 1986 onward, what I can say, violence breeds violence. The Indian state government, state terrorism, violence in Indian illegally occupied Kashmir is breeding more violence. The movement is now in the hands of the youngsters, teenagers, and this intifada kind of thing will continue. So I'm not expecting any good thing from the Modi, and the worst thing could be maybe there will be a replica of something which we have witnessed in Pulwama, and then increasing tension on the border just to justify that Modi is the only defender of India. So I cannot rule out the false flag and leading to a conflict which may escalate like it escalated a little bit on 26, 27 February 2009.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, for joining us in today's program. Thank you very much, Mr. Humayun Khan, for joining us in today's program. Thank you very much, Mr. Shahriyar Khan, for joining us in today's program. Of course, Pakistan has rejected this unilateral decision by Indian Supreme Court regarding the special status of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and Pakistan has always supported for and advocated for the rights of Kashmiris. That's all from Game Changer tonight. Take care. Allah Hafiz.